Released March 2016, the Samsung Galaxy S7 and S7 Edge were the follow-ups to the radically different S6, a phone that dramatically shifted Samsung's design language from plastic to a much more premium glass and aluminum, and it brought this gorgeous curved Super AMOLED screen with the Edge model. While the S6 was beautiful, it was also majorly divisive among the Samsung faithful, as it removed key features the brand was known for, like interchangeable batteries and expandable storage. This right here, the Galaxy S7, was Samsung's answer to the controversy. A phone with that same stunning design, but one that also brought back microSD card support and water resistance. Swappable batteries were gone for good, but the S7 would still be wildly popular, garnering huge success both critically and commercially. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and as we're fast approaching a decade since the S7's launch, I think it's a great time to ask the question: how does the Samsung Galaxy S7 hold up all these years later?
What? I can pour this champagne on my phone and it still work.
What?
Yeah, look. Kenny, I'm about to put you in a fish tank.
What? That's crazy.
Your phone can't do that, Max. Here, I have another.
What?
The new water-resistant Galaxy S7 Edge.
There's a lot to love with the Galaxy S7, and it's pretty clear immediately exactly why this phone was so popular from its inception. I have the non-Edge variant here, and this was actually my friend's phone back in the day. For comparison's sake, I do have the S6 Edge, which looks practically identical to the S7 Edge, except it's smaller. So there was 3 models of the S6, the S6, S6 Edge, and then the larger S6 Edge Plus, which made this non-Plus S6 Edge kind of pointless, as much as I loved that curved waterfall display, since it really never provided much in the way of extra functionality or practical usefulness, but rather mainly just looked pretty. There are some Edge features, but nothing too wild, and depending on how you gripped your phone, accidental touches could be an issue. So basically you were paying more for this curved screen on a phone the same size, or you went up to the S6 Edge Plus. Samsung would smartly scrap the Plus variant with the S7, and instead made the S7 Edge be a larger option by default at 5.5 inches versus 5.1 inches for the normal S7 that I have here. This just made a lot more sense. Not only did the Edge model look cooler, but it was also bigger, so it gave you more reason to go to it. Shipping with Android 6 Marshmallow plus Samsung's TouchWiz interface on top, the Galaxy S7 with 32GB of internal storage would run you around $669 in 2016, and the S7 Edge $769. The two models outside of the sizes and the curved screen are essentially identical. They've got a larger battery in the Edge, but no extra camera lenses or anything like that quite yet. If you wanted to go even bigger, you could always get the Galaxy Note 7 when that launched later that year. Except, yeah, the Note 7 didn't last too long on the market for some reason that I can't quite recall. This makes 2016 a bit of a unique year for Samsung, in that the S7 basically remained their best flagship smartphone by the end of it. Why not? It's a pretty great phone. There was also the Galaxy S7 Active, which served as the more rugged version of the device. Definitely not as sleek looking, but perfect for the type of user it appealed to, with its more durable build and increased battery capacity. The S7 would end up getting the typical 2 years of software updates to Android 8 Oreo, along with Samsung's now renamed skin. That's right, TouchWiz is dead. I'm sure we're all just so heartbroken about it. Instead, we have One UI. No, wait, hold on. One UI came out with Android 9, so we instead have Samsung Experience. Yeah, that's right. There was a brief period where Samsung Experience was the name of Samsung software. A bit of a mouthful, to be sure, but why not? It looks very similar to One UI, with those updated icons and a refreshed user interface, so it doesn't feel too out of place all these years later, but this is still Android 8, and it's going to be lacking a lot of modern features because of it. This phone is somewhat usable still, but it's far too old to give you any sort of ideal experience anymore, but at least it does look kinda pretty. And really that sums up the Galaxy S7 quite nicely. It really does look pretty. So let's kick this off by discussing the design, one that still remains a fan favorite for good reason. Featuring a premium curved glass backing and seamless aluminum frame, the Galaxy S7 is still one of the nicest phones I think Samsung has ever made, and it's nearly identical to the S6 but a bit more refined. The S6 had a flat glass back, which I found feels a bit sharp in the hand at times, whereas the S7 has this really nice subtle curvature to it, making it far more comfortable, and it looks nicer too. Aside from that, the phones are practically the same design-wise, and because we are looking at a glass back, you would probably want to be using a case with this phone anyways, like this one my friend used way back in the day. Turning to the front of the phone, we immediately see what was always the best aspect of any Samsung Galaxy, that vibrant, vivid, sharp Super AMOLED screen. My 5.1-inch S7 features a resolution of 1440 by 2560, making for a very high pixel density of 577 pixels per inch. The larger 5.5-inch S7 Edge, with its curved sides, has the same resolution, and so a slightly lower but still very impressive 534 pixels per inch. In 2016, these were easily the best smartphone displays on the market, and it really wasn't close. Compared to especially the LCD panels still on iPhones, these phones really stood out. They do have a bit of the classic oversaturated Samsung look, and burn-in can absolutely be a problem if you leave a static image on the screen for too long, but all in all, this screen has held up fantastically and is probably the best aged part of this phone. Of course, you can adjust the colors and settings, and it's worth pointing out that the resolution is 1080p by default, and I understand why Samsung always did this, since most average users wouldn't notice the difference and it would have helped battery life. Surrounding the screen, we've got relatively slim bezels, and the final physical home button on a Galaxy S. With this comes a fingerprint sensor, and it's fine, but it doesn't feel as consistent or as quick as the sensors on the Nexus 6P or Touch ID on the iPhone side from the time. Still, it does work, and it's nice to have, as are the navigation buttons on either side, which light up and disappear as you use them. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I always appreciated that Samsung actually utilized this bottom bezel. Most Androids would opt for a digital navigation bar, leaving a lot of wasted space down there. The first Pixel from 2016 is the easiest example of this. The glass back also allows for wireless charging, which is great, and we do have IP68 water resistance. Not only was this a higher standard than most phones in 2016, with the upcoming iPhone 7 being only IP67 rated, for example, but the S6 didn't have any water resistance despite there being water resistance on the S5 from 2014. Yeah, okay, insert that clip of me drowning my S6 here because I just assumed it was water resistant many years ago. Yes, I'm dumb. At least it is on the S7, thankfully. On the top of the phone, we have the SIM tray, which also contains a slot for the micro SD card, and on the bottom we have both a headphone jack and a micro USB charging port. On one hand, headphone jack, love to see it. This was the year Apple removed it with the iPhone 7 after all. On the other hand, micro USB for 2016 was not so great, with USB-C having been the standard on most Androids for about a year already. It would finally come on the Note 7, but you know, that was the Note 7, so... We've got fast charging though with the correct brick, so that's pretty nice. The battery itself is decently large for a 2016 phone this size at 3000 mAh. The larger S7 Edge had 3600 mAh. Either phone should have gotten you reliably a day's usage depending on what you were doing, but with time smartphone batteries do degrade, and at this point I wouldn't expect too much from really any phone this old. My S7 here doesn't even last a full day on standby at this point. No user swappable battery unfortunately means that it's a real pain to put in a new one, a necessary sacrifice for that beautiful design, I'm afraid. At least we've got that micro SD card support, which was already getting more and more rare with each passing year, even with Android flagships. I honestly think if the S6 had micro SD support, it wouldn't have gotten nearly as much flack as it did, but funnily enough, it having been removed to begin with meant the S7 got a lot more praise for this feature than you would have seen otherwise, and it probably helps the phone's reputation a lot in hindsight. It just looks so much better compared to the S6 because of it. There are some neat features on this phone in typical Samsung fashion, and some are quite useful, like the always-on display. There's no IR blaster anymore, which was on the Galaxy S6 still. The removal of this did annoy some users, but it wasn't a commonly used feature anyways. Samsung was finally leaning away from their feature creep years. Earlier Galaxies were always plagued with far too many features that at times made the entire experience feel overly confusing and convoluted. Oftentimes these were pretty harmless, but ultimately pointless. The ultraviolet sensor on the 2014 Galaxy Note 4 might be my favorite example of this. What really stands out for me about the S7 and its feature set is just how ahead of the game it was compared to the major competition. This is a phone that came out early 2016, and yet it had a lot of inclusions that are to this day still considered essential, but still wouldn't hit a lot of other phones until the next year, if even that. The iPhone 7 Fall 2016 did get water resistance, but wireless charging and fast charging wouldn't hit until the iPhone 8 and 10. Then you have the Pixel, which didn't get wireless charging until 2018 with the third generation. Samsung was always really good with with getting these features in ahead of their competition. Plus, they would often keep features that other phones might remove, like the headphone jack and micro SD card slot. The S7 was sitting right at the intersection of the Samsung of old, along with this new era. While the S6 ushered in a new level of premium design for the company, and was an ominous sign in how they might progress in the future by removing features, there was still very much remnants of the old Samsung present in the S6 and S7. The S7 running Samsung Experience rather than One UI is a perfect indication of what this phone is, an in-between, as Samsung geared up to drop that physical home button altogether and move to phones much closer to what we still have today with the S8 and beyond. One thing not present on this phone is a second camera lens on the rear. We've only got the one, in its iconic square shape in the upper middle of the phone, with notably a much less pronounced camera bump than that of the S6. Having only a single camera wasn't yet behind the times for 2016, but it is one area where Apple would beat Samsung to the punch. Not that the S7 didn't hold its own for photography, mind you. So let's take a look at those cameras. On the front of the phone in the top right corner, we have the 5-megapixel selfie camera. It's rather wide, which was really nice for group photos, and it's also capable of recording video in 1440p, though it doesn't look as impressive as it sounds. Still, this was definitely one of the best selfie cam setups on the market in 2016. Turning to the rear, we've got that single 12-megapixel lens. It's optically stabilized and can record video in up to 4K at 30 frames per second. On paper, this might sound like a downgrade from the S6, which had a 16-megapixel rear sensor, but the S7 has larger pixels and a larger aperture, which translates to especially better low-light performance. The S6 might take sharper photos in the right conditions, but the S7 is definitely the better shooter, and as you can see here, I was able to snap some decent results with it. While the S7 might be better than the S6 in low light, particularly indoors or at nighttime, it's still nothing special by today's standards, but it does get the job done in the very least. In ideal lighting conditions, however, like outdoors during the day, the S7 proves to still be quite capable in the right situations. As always, probably best to capture a few pictures at a time to ensure one does turn out, but I was quite happy with a good few of these photos. Nothing mind-blowing, even for the time, but absolutely one of the best cameras on any 2016 flagship. It does lack some of the versatility that was soon coming in the iPhone 7 Plus with its second telephoto camera lens, or even the LG G5 from 2016 had a second ultra-wide camera lens, which could also be useful, but Samsung wasn't quite there yet, and that's okay. The Note 7 would also feature only a single camera lens of similar quality to the S7's. Still, this was all more than good enough for the time, and the 4K 30 video is pretty decent too. The optical image stabilization is a big help across the board. Overall, the photography is solid, even if it doesn't hold up as well today, but you can still get a very nice image under ideal circumstances. This is definitely a far better experience than the cameras on Galaxy phones even just a few years older than this one. Let's turn to the hardware and performance. As was often the norm for most Samsung Galaxies, we've got two main variants of this device dependent on region. One with Samsung's own Exynos 8890 processor, and then the one I have here with Qualcomm's Snapdragon 820 chip, this being the standard chip in most flagship Androids from 2016, and then we also have 4 GB of RAM in both models. There are some minor differences between the two variants in performance and benchmarks, but when it comes to real-life use, you'd be hard-pressed to notice any differences actually significant. Android 8.0 Oreo and the Samsung Experience skin feels pretty antiquated today, but it wasn't too long ago I was reviewing the Galaxy S3, so it's not so bad, really. Still, having Android 8 on a flagship from 2016, compared to something like the first Pixel of the same year that got to Android 10, that's a big gap in terms of longevity, and while I prefer the design and hardware of the S7 over the Pixel, the software experience feels lacking, as we have to deal with far less updates as well as too much bloat. This isn't uncommon for any Android device of the time, but it's interesting to see how the S7 aged in comparison to maybe some other phones from the same year, namely the Pixel, since it came straight from Google and got more updates. Samsung just was terrible back in the day with providing long-term support for their users, and I think it's a real shame because while the S7's hardware isn't anywhere close to being up to snuff anymore, this wasn't the case only 3-4 years past its release. But then you have phones like the LG G5, which came out around the same time as the S7, and it similarly only got to about Android 8. Sadly, this was always just standard practice, even if the hardware could handle more. Now, being on an older version of Android isn't always a death sentence, and we can still download a ton of apps that you can find on the Play Store, though how they run will vary greatly at this point. We are lacking vital security updates though, making this phone very much vulnerable to malware, though you would probably be fine so long as you're quite careful with what you're installing. Even so, 2016 Android, right? No matter how sleek this device might still look and feel, it is nearly a decade old, and it's just not a phone you should be using anymore. The S7 will often go for around $50 on eBay still, but there are much better choices resources for not much more money, and that's no surprise. If you desperately wanted to try to use a Galaxy S7 today, your best bet would be looking into installing a custom ROM, at least if you have the Exynos variant of the S7. If you've got the Snapdragon model, you're likely out of luck thanks to the locked bootloader, which is quite frustrating. The Exynos S7's bootloader is easily unlockable, and you can find some relatively modern builds of ROMs like Lineage OS out there, and that might be fun to install for the novelty, but ultimately you are still going to be hindered by the aging hardware. Side note, I really just don't like Samsung software a whole lot here, even if we're thankfully past the TouchWiz era. For example, this is my friend's old phone, and initially it wanted me to re-sign into his account to do practically anything, including even changing the wallpaper. Every time I tried to go into the options in settings, it would prompt me to sign in. And look, I know, it's not that hard to sign in again, but really, to change my wallpaper, I need to re-sign in? That is just dumb. It's an out-of-the-box feature that shouldn't require anything like this, even if it's because they want me to look at their Galaxy store for new wallpapers or whatever is happening here. There's probably workarounds, but this is stupid. Just thought it was worth mentioning. Also worth mentioning is how heavily Samsung was pushing virtual reality in their marketing for this phone. Something I kind of completely forgot was even a thing. You remember Samsung Gear VR? This originally hit in 2015 at $100 and was made in collaboration with Oculus. You could throw your Galaxy phone into the Samsung Gear VR for a relatively inexpensive VR headset. It's kind of funny watching these old ads and seeing the actors acting so blown away by the headset.
You've gotta try this.
2016 was a very different time, but there was some appeal to something like this back before dedicated wireless VR headsets were on the market, and VR as a whole was just a huge trend at the time, but ultimately there just never was enough content or utility to make something like this worth it for most users. Despite being in so many S7 ads, it was discontinued in only 2017, so Samsung Gear VR just never really gained a foothold. All of this leaves the S7 and S7 Edge as a bit of a time capsule for the Samsung of the mid-2010s, a time where they called their software Samsung Experience and were providing barely any long-term support, but were now making absolutely gorgeous hardware, as well as incorporating features that had made their devices so popular to begin with, namely with that micro SD card support. There's a reason the Samsung Galaxy S7 is so fondly remembered all these years later. It is often considered one of the greatest Galaxy models ever made to this day, and honestly, I think it is. It brought the versatility Samsung users wanted, while retaining that wholly fresh level of luxury and premium design that was first featured on the controversial Galaxy S6. It refined that previous device in all the right ways. Even just that subtle curvature on the back, it's so much more comfortable in the hand. And while this phone isn't perfect, both for software updates as well as the lack of USB-C, it's still made for one of the best smartphone experiences available back in the day. And there's something to be said about this being the final Galaxy S model with a physical home button, as well as having an option that didn't include the curved over sides, the Edge, which was a feature not everybody was a fan of. This was just a straightforward, great Galaxy phone, and honestly I just can't help but appreciate that all these years later. And so with that, I think we're right about done here. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button, it's a huge help. At this point, we've done videos spanning from the Galaxy S3 to the S7, and I'll link those reviews in the description below. We'll see about maybe doing a Galaxy S8 video at some point here. My personal S8 had its battery expand last year, and the front display also got cracked at some point, so I'm either going to buy a new one or go to the trouble of trying to repair it myself, even though these things are a real pain for repairs. We'll see what happens, but if you want to see a review on the S8, make sure you subscribe for that, as well as even more content just like this. Huge shout out to the channel members for being the absolute best. Thank you guys so much for your support. And we do have a Discord server if you want to come by and say hi. Great community over there. Thank you all for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.